The stranger in the wreckage. The ruins of the battlefield stretched far beyond what the eye could see, metal husks of fallen warships, craters where energy weapons had scorched the earth, and bodies buried beneath debris, forgotten in the silence of war. Darren Voss adjusted the strap of his scavenger pack and wiped the sweat from his forehead. The air smelled of burnt metal and dust, a scent he'd long grown accustomed to. He wasn't a soldier. Not anymore. Darren was just a mechanic, a scavenger picking through the wreckage left behind by conflicts greater than himself. His only goal was survival, to collect whatever salvageable parts he could and trade them for supplies back at the outpost. But as he stepped over the shattered remains of a downed alien fighter craft, he froze. A faint sound. A groan. Someone was alive. Darren's pulse quickened. He tightened his grip on the small pistol strapped to his side and approached the wreckage cautiously. The cockpit of the ship had been torn apart, its glass shattered, wires sparking from exposed panels. And inside, half buried beneath the debris, lay a figure. An alien. A female, judging by the shape of her armor and features, though her kind, the Vyrathi, had a more rigid, battle-worn physique compared to humans. Her silver-blue skin was smeared with blood, and deep gashes ran along her arms and torso. One of her 4 fingers twitched. Her breathing was shallow. Darren knew what he should do. Walk away. She was the enemy. If she lived, she might kill him, or worse, alert others to his presence. But, he hesitated. Her armor was marked with symbols he didn't recognize, different from the standard Vyrathi military. And the wounds on her body weren't just from the crash, some looked deliberate, like someone had tried to execute her. Darren cursed under his breath. Damn it. Against his better judgment, he knelt beside her, checking for vitals. She flinched at his touch, her golden eyes snapping open, burning with defiance. Her lips moved, voice weak. Leave me, human. Darren huffed. You're welcome. She tried to push herself up but immediately collapsed, her strength failing her. Darren hesitated only a second longer before making his decision. He grabbed her under the arms and began to drag her out of the wreckage. The alien warrior groaned in protest but was too weak to resist. I swear, if you stab me after this, I'm gonna be pissed, Darren muttered. She didn't answer. By the time they reached his hidden shelter, an abandoned underground bunker, she had lost consciousness. Darren exhaled sharply, staring down at the wounded alien warrior he had just saved. And for the first time in years, he wondered if he had just made a terrible mistake. The fragile alliance. The dim glow of emergency lights cast long shadows across the bunker walls. Darren crouched beside the unconscious alien, his fingers hesitating before peeling back the broken armor plating from her wounds. It had taken everything in him to drag her back here without being spotted. And now, as he patched her up, he wondered if he had just doomed himself. She was Vyrathi, a warrior race known for their ruthless efficiency. If she woke up in the wrong mood, she could snap his neck before he had time to explain himself. But something about her didn't add up. The wounds, they weren't all from the crash. Some looked precise, intentional. The kind of wound someone inflicted on a person they wanted dead, but not quickly. Darren clenched his jaw and applied a bandage to a gash along her shoulder. If she really was a soldier, why had her own people tried to execute her? A low groan made him snap to attention. She was waking up. Lithra's entire body screamed in pain as consciousness returned. The air smelled different, not like the battlefield. Not smoke and blood, but metal and antiseptic. Her eyes fluttered open, and she immediately tensed. She wasn't alone. A human male knelt beside her, pressing a bandage to her arm. Her body reacted before her mind did. With the last bit of strength she had, she lunged. Darren barely had time to react before a hand clamped around his throat, pinning him back against the cold concrete floor. Her golden eyes burned with fierce intensity, but her grip was weak. She was still too injured to overpower him completely. "Easy, easy, I just saved your life." Darren gasped, gripping her wrist but not fighting back. Lithra's breath was ragged, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Her muscles trembled with effort, and Darren could see it, she was running on fumes. "You should have left me," she rasped. "Yeah, well," Darren coughed, "maybe I'm an idiot." Lithra's grip loosened slightly, her gaze scanning the room. "Where am I?" "Underground shelter. Far from the battlefield." Her eyes narrowed. "Why?" Darren exhaled. "Look, I don't know what happened out there, but I saw your ship go down. And judging by your injuries, I'm guessing your own people didn't exactly throw you a rescue party." Lithra's jaw clenched. He had hit a nerve. Darren sighed, rubbing his throat. "I didn't have to save you, but I did. And since you're awake now, I'd really appreciate it if you didn't strangle me." Lithra didn't move for a long moment. Then, slowly, she released her grip. Darren sat up, rubbing his neck. "Thanks." Lithra collapsed back against the cot, her body too exhausted to continue fighting. Darren sat beside her, watching carefully. He had seen plenty of battle-wounded soldiers before, but there was something about her, something different. Her silence wasn't just exhaustion. It was wariness. Mistrust. "What happened to you?" he asked. She stared at the ceiling for a long moment before speaking. "I was betrayed." Darren raised an eyebrow. He hadn't expected her to actually answer. "By who?" Lithra turned her head slightly, her golden eyes meeting his. "By my own people." A fragile trust. Darren wasn't sure how much time passed as Lithra rested. He knew she wasn't sleeping, not deeply, anyway. She would drift for short periods, only to jolt awake, her body tense, eyes scanning the room like she expected an attack at any moment. She was a soldier, trained for war, but now she was alone, stranded, and vulnerable. And she hated it. Darren didn't push her for details. If she wanted to talk, she would. Instead, he busied himself, checking supplies, making sure they weren't being tracked. "You're a scavenger," she finally said. Darren glanced over. She was watching him now, eyes calculating. "Yeah," he said. "Used to be an engineer. Now I just pick through wrecks, trade parts for food." Lithra scoffed. "And yet you risked yourself for me?" Darren rolled his eyes. "Trust me, I'm still wondering if that was a mistake." Silence stretched between them. Then, Lithra spoke again, quieter this time. "My commander ordered my execution." Darren's hand paused over the crate he had been sorting through. "Why?" Lithra's gaze darkened. "Because I refused to follow orders." Darren sat down on a nearby crate. "You disobeyed a command?" "I refused to slaughter civilians." The words hit harder than Darren expected. Lithra looked away. "My kind, we were taught that victory is survival. That mercy is weakness. But when I was given the order to wipe out an unarmed colony, I knew I couldn't do it." Darren frowned. "So they turned on you." Lithra's jaw tightened. "I was branded a traitor. My own squad ambushed me, left me for dead before the battle even ended. If you hadn't found me, I would already be gone." Darren exhaled, running a hand through his hair. He wasn't sure what he had expected her story to be, but it sure as hell wasn't that. "Guess that makes two of us," he muttered. Lithra arched an eyebrow. "You were betrayed too?" Darren shook his head. "Not exactly. I just stopped believing in the war a long time ago." Lithra studied him for a moment. "And yet you saved me." Darren sighed. Yeah. Well. Like I said, maybe I'm an idiot. Lithra smirked, just barely. It was the first real expression he had seen from her. A small, fragile moment of understanding between two people who should have been enemies. Hunted. The moment didn't last. A sudden beeping from Darren's proximity scanner made them both tense. He grabbed the small device from his belt, eyes narrowing at the screen. Motion detected. Lithra was instantly alert. Someone's here. Darren cursed under his breath. Patrol. Human soldiers. Lithra stiffened. They're searching for me. Darren hesitated. If they found her, they'd kill her on sight. And if they found him hiding her, he wouldn't fare much better. They didn't have time to run. Darren grabbed a cloth and tossed it at her. Lie down. Cover yourself. Lithra frowned but did as he said. Darren threw an old tarp over some of the medical supplies and stepped away just as the heavy metal door creaked open. Two soldiers entered, their rifles raised. Darren forced himself to stay calm. Whoa, easy. What's this about? The lead soldier, a gruff man with a scar across his jaw, stepped forward. Scavenger, huh? You alone here? Darren nodded. Yeah. Just picking through the wrecks like always. The second soldier stepped further into the room, scanning. Too close to where Lithra was hidden. Darren swallowed hard. The soldier turned, frowning. You hear anything weird lately? Darren forced a casual shrug. Just the usual wind howling through the wrecks. Place always makes strange noises. The lead soldier narrowed his eyes but seemed to believe him. Stay out of trouble, Scavenger. They turned to leave. Darren barely allowed himself to breathe. But then, a soft sound from behind him. Lithra shifting ever so slightly. The lead soldier paused, glancing back. His gaze sharpened. What was that? Darren's pulse spiked. Lithra's golden eyes locked onto his from under the tarp. And in that moment, they both knew, they were out of time. No turning back. The tension in the bunker was suffocating. Darren's mind raced. The soldiers were watching him closely now, their hands hovering over their weapons. If they lifted that tarp, Lithra was dead. And so was he. Think, Darren. Think fast. He exhaled sharply and forced an annoyed expression onto his face. You guys seriously think I'm hiding something? He gestured around at the cluttered bunker. What, you think I've got a whole alien army stuffed in here? The lead soldier's eyes narrowed. We're searching for an enemy combatant. You hear anything or not? Darren scoffed. Buddy, the only thing I've heard is my own stomach growling. The second soldier took a step toward the tarp. Darren tensed. If they checked, this was over. His brain acted before his body did. He staggered forward, clutching his stomach, then lurched to the side and vomited onto the floor. The reaction was immediate. Ah, hell. The second soldier recoiled. The lead soldier cursed and took a step back. Are you sick? Darren groaned dramatically. Yeah, I think some of that ration meat I traded for was bad. He wiped his mouth and gave them a weak glare. Look, if you're done interrogating a guy who's clearly not hiding a damn thing, I'd really like to crawl into a hole and die now. The second soldier wrinkled his nose. Ugh. Let's get out of here. The lead soldier gave Darren one last hard look. If you see anything, or hear anything, you report it. Understood? Darren nodded miserably. Without another word, the soldiers turned and exited the bunker, sealing the door behind them. Darren waited. 5 seconds. 10. 15. Then he let out a long breath and slumped against the wall. That was disgusting, Lythra muttered, pushing the tarp off herself. Darren shot her a tired look. Hey, it worked. She tilted her head slightly, considering him. You could have given me up. Darren sighed. Yeah, well, like I said, I make a lot of dumb choices. Lythra's golden eyes lingered on him, unreadable. Then she said, I owe you my life again. Darren frowned. I'm not keeping score. Silence stretched between them. Lythra shifted slightly, wincing. Darren could tell she was regaining her strength, but she wasn't at full capacity yet. Which meant they were still in serious danger. A plan to escape. Darren rubbed his temples. We can't stay here. They'll come back, and next time, they'll be more thorough. Lythra nodded. Agreed. Do you have transport? Darren glanced at the rusted old hoverbike leaning against the far wall. Technically. Lythra arched a brow. Darren sighed. Alright, no, not really. It barely runs, and it can't carry both of us. Lythra exhaled. Then we need to steal something. Darren blinked. You say that like it's easy. Lythra's golden eyes gleamed. For me, it is. Darren pinched the bridge of his nose. Right. Of course, I rescued an elite alien soldier who also happens to be a criminal mastermind. Lythra smirked. I prefer strategist. Darren muttered under his breath but didn't argue. He thought for a moment. There's an old military outpost about 4 miles from here. Abandoned, but the patrols still pass through. If we're lucky, we might find an old transport. Lythra nodded. Then we move at night. Darren exhaled. This was crazy. Absolutely insane. But there was no turning back now. Under cover of darkness. The night was cold, the sky an endless stretch of deep blue punctuated by distant stars. Darren and Lythra moved swiftly through the ruins, keeping low. He wasn't a soldier, but years of scavenging had taught him how to avoid detection. Lythra, on the other hand, was practically invisible. Her movements were silent, her presence barely noticeable. Even injured, she was far more capable than he was. They reached the outpost perimeter and crouched behind the remains of a crumbling wall. Darren peered through a pair of battered binoculars. I see a transport. Looks intact. Lythra studied it carefully. How many guards? Darren counted. 2, near the entrance. No other movement. Lythra's gaze sharpened. I'll take care of them. Darren shot her a look. I'd rather you didn't kill them. She tilted her head, amused. I was going to knock them out. Darren sighed. Right. Okay. Go for it. Before he could blink, she was gone. The 2 guards barely had time to react. Lythra moved like a shadow, striking quickly and precisely. One moment, the guards were standing at their posts, the next, they were unconscious on the ground. Darren hurried forward as Lythra dragged the second guard behind cover. Remind me to never make you mad, Darren muttered, checking the unconscious soldiers. Lythra smirked. Noted. She climbed into the transport's cockpit and started flipping switches. The old machine hummed to life, its engines warming up. Darren slid into the seat beside her. All right, let's get the hell out of here before. A sudden blaring alarm cut him off. Lythra cursed. They had a failsafe. Darren's stomach dropped. We've got company. The chase begins. Bright searchlights cut through the night as a second transport roared toward them. Soldiers poured out, weapons raised. Lythra gritted her teeth. Hold on. The transport lurched forward, its thruster sputtering before finally kicking in at full power. Darren barely had time to grab the controls before they were speeding through the ruined landscape, bullets and plasma fire streaking past them. Lithra dodged expertly, weaving between debris and crumbling structures. Darren checked the rear display. "They're gaining on us." Lithra's expression was cold and focused. "Not for long." She yanked the controls hard to the right, sending them skidding around a collapsed building. The enemy transport followed, but too late. Lithra activated the rear thrusters. A sudden burst of heat and force sent the pursuing vehicle spiraling out of control. Darren watched as it crashed into the rubble behind them. He let out a shaky laugh. "Holy hell, that actually worked." Lithra smirked. "You doubted me?" Darren exhaled. "I doubt everything at this point." She chuckled softly. The alarms in the outpost behind them blared louder, but it didn't matter. They were already gone, disappearing into the night. Nowhere is safe. They didn't stop until they were deep into the wastelands, far beyond the reach of the patrols. Lithra finally powered down the transport and leaned back in her seat, exhaling. "We're clear. For now." Darren shook his head in disbelief. "I can't believe we just did that." Lithra glanced at him. "You saved my life." "Again." Darren snorted. "Yeah, well, you repaid the favor." She studied him for a long moment before saying, "You could have left me back there." Darren sighed. "Yeah. And you could have snapped my neck the moment you woke up." A small smirk tugged at her lips. Darren looked out at the dark horizon. They had escaped, but it wasn't over. Now, they were fugitives, hunted by both their own kind. And Darren had a sinking feeling this was only the beginning. Hunted by two worlds. Darren sat in the cockpit of the stolen transport, his fingers drumming anxiously against the console. The adrenaline from their escape had begun to wear off, replaced by the cold realization of their situation. They were fugitives now. He turned to Lithra, who sat beside him, methodically inspecting her weapon. "So," he exhaled, "where exactly are we going?" Lithra's golden eyes flicked to him, her expression unreadable. "We need to get off this planet." Darren let out a dry laugh. "Yeah? And how do you suggest we do that?" "Last I checked, we don't exactly have a spaceship lying around." Lithra leaned back, her gaze distant. "I know someone who might help." Darren frowned. "Who?" She hesitated, then said, "A former ally. If he's still alive." That didn't sound promising. Darren sighed. "And where is this mystery friend of yours?" Lithra's lips pressed into a thin line. "Inside one of the most dangerous cities on this planet." "Of course. Because nothing about this situation was allowed to be easy. The City of Ghosts." Their stolen transport hummed as it skimmed low over the barren wastelands, heading toward a ruined city known as Orontiz 9. Once, it had been a thriving metropolis. Now, it was a lawless graveyard, ruled by mercenaries, criminals, and warlords. Darren had only been there once. It was the kind of place where people disappeared, where trust was a weakness, and where secrets were currency. "Great," Darren muttered as they neared the outskirts. "So, who exactly is this friend of yours?" Lithra's gaze remained locked on the horizon. "His name is Kavoris. He's an information broker." Darren's stomach sank. "Of course he is." Lithra glanced at him. "You don't approve?" "Oh, I totally approve," Darren said dryly. "I just love the idea of trusting a professional liar with our lives." Lithra smirked. "Then you'll really love what I tell you next." Darren sighed. "Do I even want to know?" She hesitated before saying, "He's also a former assassin." Darren groaned. "Perfect. Just perfect. A deal with the devil." They landed the transport in the shadows of a crumbling skyscraper and made their way through the darkened streets. Eyes followed them from the alleys. Predators, watching. Darren felt the weight of a dozen unseen threats, but Lithra moved through the streets with absolute confidence. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a rusted metal door at the end of a quiet corridor. Lithra knocked once. A voice from within rasped, "Go away." Lithra smirked. "Is that any way to greet an old friend, Kavoris?" Silence. Then, the door creaked open just enough for Darren to see a pair of glowing green eyes. A low chuckle rumbled from within. "Lithra. You're either very brave, or very stupid." She tilted her head. "Maybe both." The door opened wider, revealing a tall, gaunt alien with deep scars running across his face. His dark robes whispered as he stepped back. "Come in," he said. Darren swallowed hard and followed Lithra inside. The cost of freedom. Kavoris's hideout was dimly lit, filled with ancient technology and walls lined with data servers. He settled into a chair, fingers steepled. "You need something." Lithra nodded. "A way off-world." Kavoris smirked. "Ah. I see. And who, exactly, is your human companion?" Darren crossed his arms. "Darren. Just Darren." Kavoris studied him with mild amusement before turning back to Lithra. "And why would I help you?" Lithra's gaze was sharp. "Because I saved your life once." Kavoris chuckled. "And you think that means I owe you?" Lithra's eyes narrowed. "You know it does." A long silence stretched between them before Kavoris sighed. "There is a ship," he admitted. "A smuggler's freighter. It's heavily guarded." Darren groaned. "Why is everything always heavily guarded?" Lithra ignored him. "Where?" Kavoris leaned forward. "The spaceport. The ship leaves tomorrow at dawn. If you can get past the guards, it's yours." Darren rubbed his face. "Yeah, easy. Just waltz in and take it." Kavoris smirked. "You want it off-world. This is your chance." Lithra stood. "We'll take it." Kavoris chuckled. "I hope you survive, Lithra. You always were entertaining." Darren sighed. This was either going to work, or get them both killed. There was no turning back now. Escape or die. The spaceport loomed ahead, a fortress of metal and energy shields, crawling with guards armed to the teeth. The stolen transport hovered in the shadows of a ruined overpass, its engine humming softly as Darren peered through a pair of binoculars. "That's a lot of firepower," he muttered. Lithra checked her plasma rifle. "I've seen worse." Darren gave her a dry look. "You always say that. It never makes me feel better." Lithra smirked. "Then stop expecting comfort." Kavoris had given them the ship's location, Docking Bay 47. If they could reach it and override the security systems, they'd be off this planet in minutes. Of course, that was assuming they didn't get shot first. Breaking in. They moved through the lower levels of the spaceport undetected, slipping past cargo loaders and maintenance droids. Darren's pulse pounded as they neared the docking bay, the distant hum of ships preparing for departure filling the air. Then, a voice crackled over the intercom. "Alert! Security breach detected. Intruders in restricted zone." Darren groaned. "Let me guess, that's us." Lithra didn't answer. She was already raising her rifle. A group of heavily armed guards rushed in, weapons drawn. Lithra fired first. Plasma blasts lit up the corridor, striking two guards before the rest dove for cover. Darren grabbed a discarded pulse pistol, firing wildly as he followed Lithra toward Docking Bay 47. Alarms blared. More guards appeared, blocking their escape. Lithra growled. "We don't have time for this." She hurled a plasma grenade. Boom! The explosion rocked the bay, sending debris flying. Smoke filled the air as Darren sprinted forward, dodging gunfire, his heart hammering. The final stand. They reached the ship, a sleek, rusted freighter barely held together. Darren slammed his hand against the control panel, trying to force the door open. "Come on, come on." Lithra fired over her shoulder. "Darren, hurry." The ship's ramp hissed open. They scrambled inside as bullets pinged against the hull. Darren bolted for the cockpit, hands flying over the controls. "I hope you know how to fly this thing." Lithra slid into the co-pilot's seat. "If I didn't, we wouldn't be here." Darren flipped the ignition. The ship trembled, engines roaring to life. Outside, guards rushed forward, weapons raised. Lithra hit the thrusters. The freighter lurched upward, engines flaring. Bullets bounced off the hull as they rocketed toward the sky. Freedom among the stars. The ship broke through the atmosphere, shaking violently as they entered the cold vastness of space. Darren exhaled sharply. "We made it." Lithra checked the scanners. "For now." Darren leaned back, laughing breathlessly. "So what now?" Lithra smirked. "Now? We survive." As the stars stretched before them, Darren realized something. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just running. He was free. And with Lithra by his side, maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The adventure was only beginning.